Chapter 2, America and Britain in Prophecy, also known as the U.S. and the U.K. in prophecy, the United States and the United Kingdom in prophecy, originally the United States and British Commonwealth in prophecy, by Herbert W. Armstrong. Again, this is Chapter 2. It's entitled Prophecies Closed Until Now. Chapter Overview. A pivotal book, not for Old Testament Israel. Could we be ignored? Could we, the modern-day United Kingdom and United States, be ignored? One might ask, were not biblical prophecies closed and sealed? Indeed they were, until now. And even now they can be understood only by those who possess the master key to unlock them. But we have reached the approximate end of 6,000 years of biblical history. We have reached the end of an age. We are entering right now the world crisis at the close of present civilization. We face today conditions such as the world never before has witnessed. Today, the big problem is the stark question of survival. For the first time in world history, the weapons of mass destruction exist which can erase all life from the earth. Chiefs of government and world-famous scientists have been saying publicly, we must adjust to living in fear of human annihilation with no solutions in sight. To those prejudicially cynical toward the Bible, I say, it's your only hope. Science offers no solutions. The politicians and heads of government have no answers. In the Bible alone, you will find the advance news of what is now certain to occur, and occur it will before mankind blast itself out of existence. But another objector might ask, are not most of the prophecies outdated Old Testament writings addressed only to the ancient nation Israel, of no concern to us in our time? And the answer is an emphatic no. These scintillating, dynamic prophecies were, most of them, never given to ancient Israel. A pivotal book. The plain truth is these prophecies were written for our people of our time and for no previous people of our time. They pertain to world conditions of today and could not have been understood until today. One of the very pivotal books of prophecy is the book of Daniel. Actually, the prophet Daniel was not the author of the book known by his name. The living God was its author. The message was transmitted to Daniel by God's angel. Daniel put to writing to be preserved until our time what he heard. At the very close of his book, Daniel wrote, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he, God, said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." Daniel 12, verses 8 through 10. So the prophecies of Daniel were closed, sealed, locked up until now. But today we're living in the time of the end. Today the wise do understand. But who are the wise? Only those who fear and obey God and who have and who have the master key to unlock the locked up prophecies. God says, the fear of the eternal is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. And even most professing Christians, quote unquote Christians, refuse utterly to do that. No wonder they can't understand. And don't forget, the specific key that unlocks these closed doors of prophecy is the definite knowledge of the true identity of the American and British nations as they were mentioned in these prophecies. Stop a moment and think. If the prophecies Daniel wrote could not be understood by him, if they were closed up and sealed till the time of the end, till the latter half of the 20th century, as the angel said and as Daniel wrote, then they were closed to the ancient Israelites of that day. They contained no message for Daniel's time. Think a little further. These prophecies could not have been given to or known by the ancient kingdom of Israel. Daniel wrote in and after the time of the Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and captivity of the kingdom of Judah, 604 to 585 BC. But the kingdom of Israel had long before been invaded, conquered, and its people moved out of Palestine, transported as slaves to Assyria, 721 to 718 BC, 2 Kings 17, verses 18 and 23 and 24. That was 117 to 133 years before Daniel wrote. Years before the book of Daniel was written, most of the Assyrians, with those Israelite slaves, had migrated from ancient Assyria northwest toward Europe. How far northwest where they finally settled was not then known. How far northwest where they finally settled was not then known. They had become known as the lost 10 tribes. But today we do know. Today, as Daniel wrote, Daniel 12, verse 4, knowledge has indeed increased. The whereabouts of the lost 10 tribes is one of the ancient mysteries now cleared up. But in Daniel's day, they were lost from view, as if the earth had opened her mouth and swallowed them. Not for Old Testament Israel. Daniel's prophecy then was not a message to the Old Testament kingdom of Israel. Now think further. Nor was this prophecy a message for the Old Testament kingdom of Judah. When Daniel wrote, the Jews already were slaves in Babylon. Daniel was one of the brilliant young princes of Judah, specially chosen for service in the king's palace in Babylon. Daniel 1, verses 3 through 6. Daniel's strenuous duties in the Gentile king's service did not allow him to deliver this closed and sealed message to the scattered Jewish slaves. In this condition of slavery, the Jews had no system of religious meetings, no priesthood. There was no such thing as a printing press, no way to print and distribute literature. And besides, the prophecy was, quote, closed up and sealed till the time of the end, end quote. Our time now. The book of Daniel was not a message for the Jews of Old Testament times. Finally, realize it is emphatically clear that these prophecies pertain to no time but to our time in this 21st century. Now, I'm having to modify that. I probably should say in this 20th and 21st century, because the last days began back in the time of World War I, 1914 to 1919, and World War II, with World War II producing, and just prior to World War II, producing the sixth king of Revelation 17, verse 10. This is the only ad-libbing I'm going to do to this book, brethren. I think it's important, though, because the book here says in this 20th century, and we're now in the 21st century, God had to delay what even God himself had in mind and inspired his end-time apostle to originally write, in love for us, for you and for me who are reading this book. Some of you weren't even born until after this book had been written. And that's to your favor, as a blessing to you, that you're alive now and have the opportunity to be called and understand these truths God gave through his end-time apostle, proved to be an apostle by what the Bible references as the fruits of an apostle. There's only one man of these latter days who attained to the fruits of an apostle mentioned in the Bible. But God perhaps well had it in mind by inspiration to his end-time apostle that he wanted to wrap things up in the 20th century. But for those of you born since then, as a blessing and favor to you, those who should have had their acts together did not. And God had to delay things. And the reason he had to delay it is because of his will, as announced in 2 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9, where God says, time to him is not the same as it is for man. For God, a day can be like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years can be like a day. God doesn't count time the way man counts it. And he's not slack concerning his promise, but because of the next part of that, verse 9 of 2 Peter 3, where God says that it's his will that none perish, that all come to repentance. And because many of the people God had called, brethren, I'm talking to you if you're older and you'd been called back at the time when God was thinking of wrapping it up in the 20th century, because it's his will that none perish, because we didn't have our act together the way God wanted to see it. We forced and compelled God, because of his will, to give us a break, to give us more time, that we could get sin, as we need to do, that we could get sin out of our lives. And so here we are now in the 20th century, and things still, dangling on, but not for much longer, because we watch world news now, we see it coming together. It could happen in the next few days that the fifth seal could open up. It could happen next week, next month. But just a reminder, as I was doing on last night's World Watch program, reading from verse 20 of Matthew 24, where Christ instructed us to pray that our escape be not in the winter. And we're in winter as I read this right now, and it's cold. And God he knows we'll have to be outside during the escape, for a big part of the escape. And he knows a lot of people don't do well. Our human physical bodies don't do well in the cold. Some people would die overnight in some of this freezing winter weather. Below freezing winter weather. And he instructs us to pray that our flight be not in the winter. So we should be praying that God would at least hold things up until next spring, because we don't want to escape in this cold of winter. And it could now wrap up. And those who've been complaining, oh, why the delay? Well, you better get your act together real quick, because the delay, watching the world news, it's over. Unless God decides to hold it up some more, the delay is over. Let's go back to the book. Then know this further. The greatest mystery book of the entire Bible to most has been the book of Revelation. But the book of Daniel is the key to the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, solely and alone do we find the world's events of all prophecies correlated in order of time sequence. The book of Revelation, then, holds the key for putting together all of the prophecies in proper time order. And Revelation, too, was a closed and sealed book until our time now. We realize that the living Jesus Christ is the revelator, and that he has stripped off the seals and opened this mystery book to right understanding. And where does that lead us? To the fact that prophecy generally was written and preserved for our time today. And some 90% of all prophecy pertains actually to this latter half of, let's phrase it again, friends and brethren, as it should be, to this latter half of the 20th and 21st century, in the first part of the 21st century. And the one central master key to prophecy as a whole is the identity of the United States and the British nations in these prophecies for today. The one central master key to prophecy as a whole is the identity of the United States and the United Kingdom nations in these prophecies today. These prophecies could not pertain to any time previous to our precarious present. It may not be generally realized, but neither Britain nor the United States, neither the United Kingdom or the United States, became great world powers until the 19th century, until the early 1800s. Suddenly, in the very beginning of the 19th century, these two, until then small minor countries, suddenly spurted to national power and greatness. Suddenly spurted to national power and greatness among nations as no nations had ever grown and multiplied in wealth, resources, and power before. By 1804, London had become the financial hub of the world. The United States had exploded out of its swaddling clothes of the 13 original states and had acquired the expansive Louisiana Purchase. It was fast sprouting up to become the mightiest nation of all time. But Britain burst forth to greatness first, and until the world wars had become the greatest empire or commonwealth of nations in all history. Could we, the United Kingdom, the United States, be ignored in Bible prophecy? Could we be ignored? Between them, the UK and the US, the British and American peoples had acquired more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of all the cultivated physical resources and wealth of the world. All other nations combined possessed barely more than a fourth. Britannia ruled the waves, and the world's commerce was carried on by water. The sun never set on British possessions. Now think, could the British and American peoples be ignored in prophecies of world conditions that fill 1/3 of the entire Bible, when some 90% of all these prophecies pertain to national and international world happenings of our time now? Staggering? Indeed it is. And yet, precisely as prophesied, Britain's sun has now set. As these same prophecies that foretold Britain's greatness revealed far in advance, Britain has already been reduced to a second-rate or third-rate power in the world. And the United States, today America finds herself heir to just about all the international problems and headaches in this post-World War II chaotic, violent world. And the United States has won her last war. Even little North Vietnam held her at bay. Many other nations sap America's national strength, and he knoweth it not, as God long ago foretold. On the world scene, nothing is so important right now as to know where the white English-speaking peoples are identified in scores and hundreds of prophecies which describe vividly our sudden rise to national power and reveal the causes of that greatness. Prophecies that paint a crystal clear picture of our present international dilemma. Prophecies that open our eyes wide to see what now lies immediately ahead for our nations and what our ultimate and final status shall be. Next, we'll go to chapter 3 of the U.S. and the U.K. in prophecy.